Hey, this is former Blue Devil lineman Matt Skura. You're listening to Basketball Conference, the ACC football podcast. Go Duke, go ACC.
All right, welcome back in Basketball Conference, the ACC football podcast. It is August 2nd, and we are getting ready now to, of course, preview the Pittsburgh Panthers. Joey is still out tending to his kids, so it's just me and Jim Hammett of PantherLair.com. Long time friend of the show, Jim. We've been doing these for a really long time, and you're back, and you know what time it is.
Yeah, pretty much at this point. I know when August rolls around, I get the DM from Mike and Joey, and it's time to preview some football.
Yeah, it's time, and this is a really intriguing one here with Pittsburgh. Pat Narduzzi, hard to believe, he's entering his 10th year at Pittsburgh, and I feel like I'm still it's just yesterday we were watching him on the sideline at Michigan State as a defense coordinator, and he was in play for a ton of jobs, ton of P5 jobs. But somehow he's already been at Pitt a decade. We're now a couple years removed from an ACC title. And last year, things kind of bottomed out a bit, right? Pitt finishes 3-9, 2-6 in conference play. It was a surprise to see them be that bad because Pat Narduzzi, quite frankly, has set a bar of this team consistently being, if not one of the top 5 or 6 teams in the ACC, at least like a middle of the road team pretty consistently. And for it to bottom out the way that it did last year, obviously cause for a full offensive reset, and we'll talk about that. But what was the reaction from the fan base to a 3-9 year, having it come so quickly after going to an ACC title game and winning the conference, to then come back and go 3-9? It's tough. It's just like been a couple years of just kind of dredging through the mud a bit after a really successful year they had a couple years back.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it was met very well. I mean, I think just because he raised the bar. I mean, I think whenever you win an ACC championship, you kind of expect to float in those waters a little bit. And so for it to come crashing down like it did, it was a little surprising. But I mean, I think I kind of remember on our preview last year, I'm like, this all could work, but it really comes back down to the quarterback. I mean, we had no idea what kind of quarterback Phil Dracovic was going to be. We didn't know if he was going to be 2020 Phil Dracovic or 2022 Phil Dracovic, and they got the latter. So I think that kind of really started things off poorly. I mean, you go into those games like against Cincinnati and West Virginia, and you could just tell right away, like, okay, this guy doesn't have it. So
Right.
Now what? So I don't know if it was necessarily a 3-9 roster up and down, but they had 3-9 quarterback play, and definitely from the coaching staff, and it's a brand new, the entire offensive coaching staff moved on, and I think that was kind of a necessary move, especially at this juncture of Narduzzi's tenure.
Yeah, I mean, you tend to see, especially when there's like consecutive seasons of struggle on one side of the ball, when you're this far into a tenure, you tend to see entire staffs get kind of pushed out the door, right? Brian Kelly did at Notre Dame after that really, really bad year they had in 2016. He revamped the entire offensive coaching staff. They went to 2 college football playoffs after that. It's really important to kind of reinvent yourself when you're in the middle of your tenure. And it does feel like coming into this season, this is going to be an entirely different offensive scheme. Like bringing in Cade Bell from Western Carolina is a big deal in terms of, well, the offense will at least look different. I think for Pittsburgh fans, I feel like that's going to be welcomed, especially after, losing Kenny Pickett a couple seasons ago and then really kind of being in the quarterback abyss since then and running an offense that at the very least it seemed outdated a bit just in terms of, the talent relative, the coaching staff and the scheme relative to talent on the roster.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like the hiring of Cade Bell is just a completely different thing that Narduzzi has ever done. I mean, obviously Frank Signetti struggled last year, but he was in the same mold of his predecessors. I mean, you had guys like Mark Whipple and Sean Watson, like veteran offensive coordinators, some guys with NFL experience. So all of a sudden you bring in this guy, he's like 34 years old. He's never coached at the Power 4 level, but Western Carolina had like the number 3 offense at the FCS last year. I mean, he's high tempo guy. I mean, he's going to push the issue, and it didn't really stop with Kate Bell. It's the entire offensive coaching staff. I mean, we just had media day at Pitt the other day, and we were in a room with every assistant, and I'm like, these guys don't look that much older than some of like the fifth year seniors. And I don't think they are either. I mean, it's a completely new thing, but whenever you talk around the program, to some of the players and the coaches, they're like, it's a new energy. It's something completely different than we ever had. I mean, these guys are up and in your face, and it's just like 100 miles per hour all the time. So, I mean, for Narduzzi to, in the middle of his career, to always lean on a pro style guy, an experienced guy, to just hand it over to such a young guy, it's so different, and it's very intriguing to see if it'll work.
I saw the quote from Narduzzi at ACC kickoff when he was like, I'm going to let Cade Bell do his thing. I'm not going to micromanage. And from like the outside looking in, I think the popular narrative has been like Pat Narduzzi is really happy winning games like 14-6. Like he'd be thrilled to just continue to do that. And I think that joke was that way because outside of that ACC championship year, when they won the title in 21, I think the joke has been, well, like, he has just had like this it's always been like a pro style quarterback until the breakout of Pickett. And then they haven't really been able to find that quarterback since then. But, you know, they've still been able to lean on a really strong defense. And that's Narduzzi's bread and butter. That's how they're going to win games. With the offense looking so different and stylistically, it's just going to be so different than what we're used to out of Pitt. What should we take away from that statement Narduzzi made at ACC kickoff where he was like, yep, I'm not going to micromanage. Cade Bell's going to do his thing. It really is like a full lean into like, this is going to look a lot different and it's going to take some getting used to the point you just made.
Well, I think at times last year, people wish he would have micromanaged a little bit more. I mean, I think people wanted him to step in and, you know, say like, hey, man, like Phil Drakovic's not it. We got to try something different.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think Narduzzi always says is like, I'm a defensive coach. I know I'm the head coach, but like, I always let the offensive coaches do their thing. And, you know, I think at times Pitt fans would like to see him show a little more interest in offense. And, you know, like whenever the offense is struggling, like he needs to come in and, you know, make some moves. So, yeah, I mean, he's going to give Cade Bell whatever he wants to do. And it's just fascinating because he is so young, because he's never coached at this level. And it's different. But, yeah, I mean, Cade Bell's going to have free reign. And it's interesting to see because when, you know, over the summer you saw recruiting and you saw the type of players Pitt was landing and versus the type of players they have on the roster right now. So I don't know if he quite has every piece here just yet. I don't know. I mean, this team is still probably catered more towards, you know, the past coaching regime. So like, I don't know if they have those speedy guys. I don't know if they have those slot receivers or those quick running backs just yet. I mean, they have some of them. They brought some transfers in. He even brought some guys with him from Western Carolina. So we're going to see how it all meshes. But yeah, I mean, Cade Bell's, he's going to have full autonomy. I mean, Pat Narduzzi's not going to tell him what to do. It's just a matter of, okay, is this 34-year-old offensive coordinator ready to coach in the ACC?
Yeah, and kind of a follow-up to that, because obviously it's understandable that recruiting at the skill positions would look a lot different just because the offensive scheme is just totally different. In terms of the offensive line and how they're going to recruit like the offensive line moving forward, is it going to be similar to what we've seen in the past, like these big bruising offensive linemen? Is it going to be, you know, guys that are more athletic because, you know, we've seen the type of offense that he's run at Western Carolina? Like, how do you think the offensive line recruiting is going to be impacted by the Cade Bell hire?
I mean, I stylistically, I'm not seeing too much of a change. Like they're still going for those bigger guys. I mean, I think there's just more of an expectation that they have to be in shape. They have to be ready to go and play at this tempo. But I mean, I still think within this offense, it's not like a air raid Big 12 offense. I mean, there's still elements of running. There's going to be a lot of jet sweeps, get the guys out in the flat, that kind of stuff. So, I mean, they're still going to have that big, you know, Pittsburgh offensive line that people are accustomed to seeing. It's just the tempo is going to be a little bit different.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. Quarterback. So, I mean, you got to kind of get this right. You know, we talked about the last couple of years. It's been a struggle since Pickett left. You got to get quarterback right. Nate Yarnell obviously was on the roster last year. I don't think that matters quite as much now when you bring in an entirely new offensive coaching staff, but he was on the roster last year. Eli Holstein, a transfer from Alabama. Is this an open competition? Is this Yarnell's job to lose? What does it look like, at least? I know we're very early in camp, but what does it look like right now as we sit here recording August 2nd?
So going through spring ball, like it was only natural that like Nate Yarnell would be the number one quarterback just
Right.
because he was the guy in place. That's he ended the season as the number one guy. He started the last two games. So it was only natural for him to kind of have the off season. And I mean, they brought in Holstein, and that's an interesting story. I mean, he was a former four-star guy. He redshirted Alabama last
Yep.
year, and I mean, just a year ago at this time, he was one of the top incoming quarterbacks in the entire country. So there's a lot of excitement around him. So it's hard to say because like Nate Yarnell was at ACC kickoff. He was like he's kind of being presented as the starting quarterback.
Right. Right.
But on media day, Pat Narduzzi reiterated that there is still a competition. Like there are things going on, and they bring out like 10 to 12 offensive players and 10 to 12 defensive players for media day. They brought out both quarterbacks, which suggests to me that they at least want to put up the guys that there's at least a competition. I mean, I'm still leaning towards Yarnell, but there's a lot to like about Holstein. I don't know if he's 100% in spring. So, I mean, I think he's going to be able to turn it loose here, and there might be a little bit more of a competition.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously having a junior quarterback versus having a redshirt freshman, it does make a difference, even if the scheme's changing. The type of quarterback Holstein is versus Yarnell, is there one guy who is a better fit for what Cade Bell wants to do, you think, or are they pretty similar in terms of, how they look stylistically?
I think Holstein's a little bit more mobile. I mean, I think he can run around a little bit. But the thing with Yarnell is he's from Texas. He went to Lake Travis High School, who they produce a quarterback every year.
Yeah.
And he even said whenever Cade Bell came in, he's like, I'm really comfortable with this. I'm comfortable being in shotgun. This is what I did in high school. When I came to Pittsburgh, I had to learn how to go under center. I had to learn all these pro style concepts. But like for him, he's like, I'm kind of going back to what I'm comfortable with. So I mean, I think they both can kind of fit into this scheme, just because Holstein can move around a little bit, and obviously Yarnell just has some comfort level just kind of playing with four wide receivers, being in the shotgun. So I think it's an interesting race, and I even if Yarnell wins the job, I don't know if he's going to start all 12 games. I mean, I think it's something that can. The way I put it the other day, next year is when you want to figure out. Next year's probably the year you kind of want to go and try to win the ACC championship again. It's probably not going to happen this year. So you got to figure out what's happening this year. You want to right the ship, and you want to get it right and get the quarterback right and try to make your move next year.
Running back, Rodney Hammond, right? So incumbent starter at running back, but you have Desmond Reed. You talked about the Western Carolina transfers. Desmond Reed comes in and ran for like 900 yards last year at Western Carolina under Bell. Does he push Hammond here? I mean, I think it's pretty clear it's going to be a running back share in the backfield, right? I think it's pretty clear Reed's got the experience with Cade Bell and his offensive system, but that Rodney Hammond is a really good player. So how good can this running back room be? It's been a while since we've been able to talk about Pittsburgh in terms of what they've had in the running back room. It's been a few years now since basically Izzy Abanikanda left.
I mean, I think they're both going to play, and I think they both bring a little bit something different to the table. I mean, Rodney Hammond's not necessarily tall, but I wouldn't call him a small running back. I mean, he's kind of a between the tackles, your standard, I formation running back. I mean, Desmond Reed obviously played in this offense, and he's electric. I mean, he's explosive, and you heard about it all off season. I think the other day, like, I don't know how, but like a practice play got leaked on Twitter by a fan account, and it was like Desmond Reed busting like a 97-yard run. I mean, like he's that kind of player. I mean, he's little. I mean, that's the thing that strikes you whenever you see these Western Carolina transfers. You're like, okay, I know why they were in the FCS, but like they're fast, they're electric, they're explosive. So I mean, and they know what they're doing. They understand this offense. So I think it's going to be a little bit of both. I mean, I think both of them could play and be effective for this team. But yeah, I'm really intrigued to see Reed. I mean, just even talking to the players at media day, they're like, this dude can play. So it's going to be kind of fun to watch.
Receiving room, Raphael Williams. He's in our Western Carolina transfer, but you do return Kanata Mumfield, obviously, coming into his senior year. Very productive player. I feel like just the skill position talent has been upgraded, right? I mean, you talked about the running back room in terms of Reed with his speed. I feel like they're just getting more athletic again at receiver as well, which is something that I think the Pitt coaching staff would welcome, considering the struggles they've had with consistency at the very least at that position over the last few seasons.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel bad for Konate Mudfield because like he came to Pitt like on the heels of like Jordan Addison winning the Blitnikoff,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
like he was a big transfer. Like a lot of teams wanted him, and like he's been like Mr. Steady Eddie, but like there's been 5 starting quarterbacks over the past 2 seasons, so it's like he doesn't have a ton of touchdowns, but he catches like anything you throw his way. So I mean, I think he's kind of due for a big season. I think he's capable of doing it. Another returning guy is a sophomore, Kenny Johnson. Everyone's really excited about him. He had like a big kickoff return last year, a couple touchdowns. He was like an in-state prospect, and I think he's kind of primed to like kind of expand more of his game in this offense. I think it's kind of more catered to his skill set. But then, yeah, you talk about the Western Carolina guys. Raphael Williams is one, and CJ Lee's another. So those are two guys that have definitely played in this offense. They're probably more in that slot type of guys. But yeah, they have different weapons. That's the thing. Like I said, I never really believed Pitt was a 3-9 roster. I think it was just really bad quarterback play at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to look at, so I mean, obviously the quarterback play was poor. It feels like the offensive line, basically since Pickett left, hasn't been able to really stay healthy. Like, is this the year that finally happens? I know they've been rotating left tackles like over the last couple of years. Guys just continuously go down. Is this the
Yeah,
year that, I mean, nobody can predict health, right? But like, how is Pitt looking in terms of depth at the very least? You know, if a guy goes down, are they suited to be in a position to, you know, roll somebody else out that is at least capable up front? Or is this going to be a year where, look, if we lose a starter or two, this is going to look kind of how it's looked the last couple of seasons where we've struggled up front?
yeah. I mean, sometimes like when it comes to offensive line, I mean, I guess just because it's happened to Pitt a lot lately, it's like whenever these guys get hurt, someone else plays. So you're developing experience that way. So I mean, there's like BJ Williams. He was a true freshman. He ended up starting 8 or 9 games at guard, and that was never the expectation. But now he comes into this year as like a returning starter. It's kind of like a bonus. So I mean, I think they can get pretty good line play. They added a transfer, Lyndon Cooper from NC State. So they tried to beef some things up. One of the guys they lost last year for the entire season, Ryan Jacoby, he was an Ohio State transfer. He's back. So they have a little more options. I still kind of wonder about the tackles, but I'd say they probably have 4 or 5 guys they can rely on in the interior. But as long as their tackles stay healthy, they're both pretty good. I think this can be an effective offensive line. I mean, provided that they adjusted to the scheme and the
Yeah.
tempo and everything. But yeah, I mean, on paper, they're good players.
Just moving in a positive direction there. It sounds like as a whole, like if Pitt gets quarterback right, it feels like everything else is in place to at least not be like a bottom 3 or 4 offense in the conference like they were last year, where it just seemed like everything was hard. Like everything was hard to run the ball, hard to throw the ball, third down conversions. Everything was difficult for the offense last year. It feels like at the very least as a unit, we'll, like you mentioned, we'll see how the players adapt and pick up the new scheme. But it does feel like on paper, Pitt fans should be feeling at least pretty good going into the year about the state of the offense relative to years past.
Yeah, I mean, there's almost like nowhere to go but up. I mean, there would be some
Yeah.
games where like they would have like 11 or 12 like first downs. Like
Yeah.
that's just tough to survive, and that's asking too much of your defense. So I mean, like they were in some like I think that West Virginia game they were in it. It's just like Phil Dracovic threw 3 interceptions. They couldn't do anything with in the passing game, and it's like it was just like weird things like that. So like I don't know if they're going to be the greatest offense in the world, but if they're just competent, if they have good, like at least decent quarterback play, it's. I mean, I think they're going to improve on 3 wins at least.
Let's take a quick second to remind you about Section103.com. It is the internet's premier place for all things wonderful Georgia Tech apparel. They've got t-shirts, they've got sweatshirts, they've got hoodies, they've got a short sleeve coach hoodie if you want to look like Coach Key. They've got onesies for babies. They've got all things for any man, woman, children, something for the whole family. All the Georgia Tech fans in your life, they need something from Section103.com. Use promo code GOACC for 10% off your first order. You can go get t-shirts supporting NIL efforts with guys like Haynes King and Zach Pyron. They've got shirts supporting the basketball team, the baseball team, the volleyball team, all sorts of wonderful Tech traditions, all sorts of things. Again, any Georgia Tech fan in your life, they need something from Section103.com. Once again, use promo code GOACC for 10% off your first order. I particularly love the Feliz Bobby Dodd sweatshirts. We got Christmas season coming up before you know it. You're going to want one of those for your holiday party. Go get it all at Section103.com. Huge shout out to Steven and the gang. Thank you so much to them for their support of the Basketball Conference podcast. We would love it if you guys would go show your support for section103.com as well. Now, back to the episode.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get into the schedule here in a few minutes and talk about the backyard brawl there in September. That is a gigantic game for both schools, I think. More so than usual. I just mean in terms of like coaching staffs and that sort of thing. Defensively, so Charlie Partridge leaves for the NFL. Obviously, a long time, very good college coach, was really effective and there for a while under Pat Narduzzi. It's really hard to replace a guy like that. Pat Narduzzi is a defensive-minded coach. Losing somebody like that and having the understanding that, look, we're a program that's historically been built on what we've been able to do, at least under Narduzzi's tenure. We've historically been able to hang our hat on the defense, right? Took a few years, and then it was like, okay, that's a Narduzzi defense that we saw at Michigan State. And it's kind of been that way for the most part ever since. How significant is the Partridge loss? And then just kind of looking at the defensive line, pretty young on the interior in terms of guys that have experience, right, that have played a lot of snaps. It appears on paper that the interior defensive line would be the concern of the unit, and then how significant is the loss of Charlie Partridge just in totality for the defensive line as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is just the state of college football kind of set off a chain of effects here with Pitt's defensive line, because I don't think Charlie Partridge necessarily was looking to go to the NFL, but
right.
Pitt lost Sam Okunlola. He was a promising redshirt freshman defensive end last year. He went in the portal. He was asking for more money in the NIL, and he ended up at Colorado. So
Yep.
I think whenever that happened, Partridge said, you know what? I don't want to recruit my own guys. I don't like doing that.
Yeah.
And so that kind of just set off a ripple effect. So, I mean, I think what he did is most of the guys in that room are like 4-star guys. Like that, it's a very well-rounded room. It's just inexperience. You don't know what you're going to get. And they weren't necessarily great last year. They lost some of their 2 defensive ends last year. So you're kind of starting from scratch, so to speak. But again, a lot of these guys, like they landed some good guys out of the portal. They have a lot of young 4-star guys. It's just a matter of getting on the field and playing. And I mean, you just don't. I mean, I think his replacement, I think Tim Dallas is a good coach. He's been coaching for like 25 years. He's that kind of guy. But Partridge was arguably the best defensive line coach in the country. Like 2 years ago, Kalijah Cansey was the best defensive tackle in the country. I mean, like that's what you're losing. You're losing elite production. Pitt's up. Pitt, actually, I think the past 5 years, Pitt has the most sacks in the country. Like that's what you're losing. So even if you get good defensive line play this year, you're kind of missing that elite level that Partridge brought.
The whole coaching movement part of realignment, NIL, everything else is really interesting. Chip Kelly leaving UCLA, Jeff Hafley getting like an excellent job, obviously with the Packers. But when he's talking about the state of college football, when he's taking that Packers job, and he's like, yeah, I mean, I was kind of looking anyway. Dino Babers, before he got fired, there were rumors that he was looking around. Like a lot of these coaches at these mid-tier programs, it feels like, are kind of like, all right, well, if I get a better offer, I don't want to recruit my own roster, to the point you just made with Partridge. That's going to make things really interesting to see, like, okay, moving forward, is it just like these guys are going to move to, these head coaches are going to move to like P2 coordinator jobs because they simply do not want to deal with the headache of being a head coach anymore? I don't know. And in Partridge's case, like the loss of him with what he's been able to do with Pitt's defensive line is, not great. Linebacking core, I mean, you add Kie Thompson, first team MAC, nice addition, right? I feel like the pass rush, especially with the questions that Pitt has on the interior defensive line, I feel like the pass rush is going to have to come obviously from the defensive ends and the linebackers like it always does. But when you're going to potentially, and we'll see how it shakes out, potentially have to make up some ground with your interior defensive line, I think this linebacking core has to be really strong. So outside of Thompson, how are they looking on paper?
Yeah, I mean, whenever you think of Pitt's defense under Narduzzi, it's like it's known for that defensive line, and every year they usually have 1 or 2 defensive backs drafted. So it's always like those 2 units, then the linebackers. But like right now, on paper, and I mean, I think some of it still needs to be proven, but I think
Yeah,
it's one of the better looking linebacker sets they've had maybe since Narduzzi has been here. They have a lot of
it's a good
sophomores
sign.
they really like. I think Kyle Lewis is like primed for a big year. Braylon Lovelace, he's another sophomore they like a lot. Jordan Bass, he's like a really good high school player for Virginia. I think he's gonna break out this year. So I think they're young, but they were willing to put them on the field as freshmen, and they responded to it. So I think moving forward, and I think that's kind of the waters you kind of need to swim in if you're Pitt. It's like, all right, you got to throw these guys out there as freshmen and hope you can hit on a couple of them, because you never know if your seniors might leave, and that's kind of what happened. I think Solomon DeShields transferred to Texas A&M. He kind of chased the bag, so to speak. So you kind of have to hedge your bets a little bit and be like, all right, I think these sophomores are ready. I think they're going to be good, and you just kind of have to hope for the best. I guess that's just kind of the state of college football.
No secret, Jim. I'm a Virginia Tech alum. Donovan McMillan is anchoring the back end of the secondary, and I loved him as a like Virginia Tech was in on him. I loved him as a high school prospect. Ended up at Florida, didn't play too much, transferred to Pitt, and now he is the anchor there in the back of the defense with Javon McIntyre. This team's going to be young at corner, right? Much like the interior defensive line, a lot of inexperience at corner, but I feel like they got safety figured out. So what's the level of concern, I guess, with cornerback play entering the season? Does Pitt feel like they got some guys there they can lean on even if they are a little bit inexperienced? And how much of the onus is going to be put on the two starting safeties?
Yeah, I mean, I think last year at this time, Pitt had three, veteran starting cornerbacks and two new starters at safety, and it's the complete opposite this year. You feel really good about safety, and you wonder what's going to go on at cornerback. But I mean, kind of like speaking to that Charlie Partridge point, he used to be the assistant head coach. And over the offseason, they made Corey Sanders the safety coach. He's now the assistant head coach. And that kind of speaks to how they feel about him. And if you look at Pitt safeties the past couple of years, I mean, it went from Paris Ford to Mar Hamlin to Brandon Hill, Eric Hallett to now Donovan McMillan and Javon McIntyre. I mean, it's been like they've graduated two guys to two guys to two guys that are all really good. So again, yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot of expectations for the safeties to play well, and I think they're capable of it. But quarterback's a different story. I mean, I they really leaned on those three seniors last year to the point where none of these other guys got a lot of snaps. I mean,
Yeah.
you're looking at like Rylan Gandy is probably like one of your more experienced guys. A guy like Rashad Battle, who's been hurt the past couple of years, he played a little bit. They picked up a transfer from Nebraska, Tamon Lynham. So, I mean, right now I couldn't tell you who the two starting corners are. I mean, I think there's about six of them. You could throw their names in a hat, shake them up, and pick two, and that might be how it works.
Not great. I mean, it might end up being okay, but I mean, heading into the year, you like to be in a little bit better spot there. They were so veteran laden last year that you felt like this was coming a little bit, but man, I guess just as a whole, Pat Narduzzi, right, entering year 10, coming off of the season that he had, revamping the offensive coaching staff, losing Charlie Partridge on the defensive staff, young and inexperienced interior defensive line and cornerback. I feel like there is a path, obviously, for Pitt to go back to a bowl game. I would be very surprised if it's 3-9 again. We'll get into the schedule here in a second, but like, what would it take in your mind for Narduzzi to like really, really be on the hot seat? Is he on the hot seat already because last year was so bad, or what do you think it would take if not? Like, I feel like a real bottoming out, swinging and missing a quarterback and have the offense be as bad as it was again. Could that be the recipe?
Yeah, I mean, I think another like 3-9 type season that
Yeah.
would put him on the hot seat going into 2025. But I mean, I think if he can kind of build himself back up, get to a bowl game, at least get things pointed in the right direction, I think he's at least avoiding the hot seat. I mean, I wouldn't say he's polarizing, but every fan base has their opinions about every head coach,
Yeah.
and some people are unrealistic about where Pitt's place is in the world. I mean, I think relative to what Pitt is and where they stand financially, I think he does a pretty good job. I mean, you look outside of Clemson, Florida State. I think Pitt's third in wins since he's been here. I
Yeah.
think over the past 5 years, they're second in draft picks in the ACC. Like, he does a lot of those type of things well, and like it's a clean program. You never really hear guys getting in trouble at Pitt. So I think one of the things working in his favor is that. I mean, I think he has a strong culture. He puts guys in the league, and for the most part, he keeps them relatively competitive. I mean, 3-9. I think that was Pitt's worst season since like 1998. It was just
Yeah.
it's not like Pitt is like a perennial 9-10 win team, but they're never that bad. They're always
Right.
a bowl team. And so, I mean, if he can just prove that this year was an outlier, I mean, I think people can get past it.
I mean, this is a compliment, but, Pitt is always consistent. You know where they're going to be, and they're always a pain in the ass to play, right? So, like, even if they're just like a fringe bowl team, or maybe, they're having a pretty decent year, they win 8-9 games, whenever you're an opposing team, you're going to play Pittsburgh, they're going to be a pain in the ass. And I mean that with all due respect to Narduzzi. And that all makes sense, and I agree. I feel like it would really have to be a bottoming out. Anytime you're 10 years into a tenure, the polarization within the fan base is always present. So that's what happens. He's one of the longest tenured coach. I'd have to go back. I think he got there after Dabo, but he's got to be one of the longest tenured coaches in the ACC at this point. I can't.
Yeah, like him, maybe Doran.
Yeah, Doran's been there a while too. Yeah, yeah,
But those might be the top three. Offhand, I'm not positive, but
yeah, it's been quite the run. Looking at the schedule here, I mean, I think it does set up pretty well for Pitt to get back to a bowl game on paper. I referenced this a few minutes ago, but that September 14th game against West Virginia, the backyard brawl, it is always a big game. Always, always, always a big game. I think considering where Neil Brown was entering 2023, how he entered last year on the hot seat in West Virginia was obviously much better than a lot of people thought entering last year. And then coming off of a 3-9 season for Pitt under Narduzzi, I feel like this game is gigantic for both schools in terms of coaching staff trajectory, that sort of thing. I try not to put too much into a rivalry game, but this one feels especially important considering the direction that both programs at least are heading in the short term.
Yeah, it was huge. And I mean, I talked to West Virginia people last year, like they weren't sure if, Brown was going to survive losing to Pitt again. Like
I know.
it was getting to that point for him because he didn't really have a big season. And like, if you start losing your arch rival year after year, like that's never going to help your case either. So
No.
I think it's a big game though. I mean, I obviously West Virginia won that game. The funny thing about that game is like it was so bad. It was both teams had exactly 211 yards. Like it was an absolute rock fight.
Brutal watch. Yeah.
But like then West Virginia goes and wins 9 games and Pitt goes and wins 3. And that's why I always try to tell people it's like there's such a fine line between being good and bad in college football. It's like you're not that far from like winning a couple extra games and getting bowl eligible.
I agree. I think there's in some cases there is a greater distance between being good and being elite rather than being good and being bad. There's so many teams just like in the middle across the sport. And it's just sometimes it's much harder to make that step to becoming an elite program than it is between the good and the bad years. I mean, God, ask Narduzzi, right? You're a few years removed from an ACC title.
Yeah, but like, I was just
go.
saying,
Oh no, go ahead. You're good.
Yeah, going back to that West Virginia game. I mean, I think it's been great that they've been playing again. Like, it's like with every change in the world in college football, with everything, it still feels good. Like whenever like those two teams get together, like the atmospheres both years have been great. So, I mean, I think it's going to be juiced up at Heinz Field that day, and I think it'll be close again. I mean, I really don't know how good either team's going to be, but I at least know it'll be a competitive football game.
It's the one rivalry that came back into the fold at just the right time when we were losing so many others. And, we're like a week removed from Big Ten Media Day at this point, and we hear Lincoln Riley talking about the USC Notre Dame rivalry, and there's no game, I guess, past either 2025 or 2026. There's no game scheduled. And now you see Riley being like, we're going to be playing a tough schedule in the Big Ten. Purist in me wants to keep that game. Otherwise, I'm good. And then you got Notre Dame's AD coming out and be like, no, we want to keep that game. So it's already a pissing match. But we kept the Pittsburgh, we revived, I would say, the backyard brawl with Pitt and West Virginia. I totally agree with you. It's great that this game is being played again. This opening stretch in September, kind of regardless of what happens in that game, against West Virginia. We'll set that aside for a second. It feels like if Pittsburgh takes care of business against Kent State, a Cincinnati team that is not looking on paper to be very good, and then Youngstown State, if you go 3-1 in that stretch, I think you have to be feeling pretty good about your chances to make a bowl game. Anything less than that, I look at the rest of the schedule and I'm like, man, you really got to like kind of scratch and claw, and things got to go perfectly, especially with the stretch we'll talk about in a second in November, where Pittsburgh's got some tough games coming up in that month, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, and this goes back to your favorite stat about Pitt of how they've never been undefeated in non-conference play. So like
every year we're reminded.
Yeah, so you have that 4-game stretch to start the year. But yeah, if you take care of business against Kent State and Youngstown State, and you split the two rivalries, Cincinnati West Virginia games, and I think they have an early season September bye, which is kind of a nice boost for them. So yeah, if you can go 3-1 into that bye week, then you can just have 8 ACC games to finish the year. Yeah, you have to feel pretty good about it.
I've already recorded a handful of these season previews, and it feels like since week 1 is August 31st, it does feel like a lot of teams are getting, at least in the ACC, are getting a September bye week. They are getting, an early bye and then a bye mid to late in the schedule, which I think is definitely nice. It's going to help. The way Pitts is, and you mentioned the early bye in September, it's really interesting how it's laid out, because you get the September 28th bye week after the Youngstown State game. You travel to North Carolina on the 5th. You're home against Cal, and then you have another bye. So you have 2 byes in a 3-week period. Mm-hmm. That's, first of all, a quirk. Second of all, it sets up for a really rough second half of the season in terms of like you play some of your toughest games from October 24th onward, and then not having a bye for the final 6 weeks of the year seems really, really tough.
Yeah, definitely tough. I mean, personally, like I love it. I might be able to do something in the fall,
Yep.
2 bye weeks. Like I might try to like find something to do. I don't know, but yeah, it's a weird scheduling quirk. Like when I first saw that, I was like, huh. I've never seen like 2 byes mid-season, but yeah, there is a Thursday game in there, so they kind of do have like a 10-day off period.
Yep.
I think Syracuse is who's the Thursday game?
Yeah, Syracuse. You're right. Yep.
So they do kind of have that like sort of bye type thing, that extra 3 days. So it's nice, but yeah, with the schedule, they do have some tough ones at the end. I mean, whenever you're looking at that like Clemson game, like towards the end of the year, and Louisville, like that's a tough stretch right there. So they got to make it count where they can. Like they got to like beat like the teams like Boston College and Virginia, and maybe pick one off against North Carolina, something like that. But like if they can do that, and we talked about that 3-1 stretch, then like we're already talking bowl game, and like I
Right.
think that's kind of where you need to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly after the year they had last year, just get back to a bowl game at the very least. The thing about the Syracuse game too, Syracuse, it appears, is also coming off of a bye, so both teams are going to be on 10 days rest, which will be interesting. Sometimes that isn't always the case, but they gave them both. Yeah, exactly. All right, so I mean that the winnable games on the schedule that I would put in the winnable bucket, and then there's a couple toss-ups. Then the games obviously will be tougher to win. The games that I put in the very winnable category: Kent State, Cincinnati. I know they're a P4 school, but I think they are going to struggle. Youngstown State. I think Cal is very winnable. I think Syracuse will be tough. We can maybe put that in the toss-up bucket if you want, but I think Pitt will be favored in that game. UVA, I think, is going to be pretty bad. And Boston College at the end of the year, we'll see what they are, but I'm not too bullish on BC. Mm-hmm. Toss-up games, obviously West Virginia at North Carolina is a toss-up. At SMU, I'm going to put in the toss-up bucket because I am very curious to see SMU's adjustment to playing in a power conference versus the AAC. I think they have a very good team, but it's going to be interesting to see that. And then I think Louisville's a toss-up because, especially when Pittsburgh gets them in the schedule, I don't think Tyler Shuck's going to be healthy by November 23rd. He's never been healthy by then. So yeah. I'm going to put that in the toss-up bucket, and I think Clemson is obviously going to be a very tough game, but Pitt has played Clemson tough before, and you get that at home. I think Pittsburgh can win 7 games here. I do. I think this is at minimum a 6-win schedule. Missing Florida State is gigantic. Not getting Notre Dame in the non-con is gigantic. And missing NC State is gigantic. Yeah, you got Clemson and Louisville on the schedule. You don't have to play a Virginia Tech team that should be improved. This schedule sets up pretty well for Pitt, I think, to get back to a bowl game at the very least and maybe get 7 or 8 wins out of it if all goes according to plan offensively. Can't bank on everything, but I think this is like a potentially 8-win ceiling, but I think they definitely get back to a bowl game here.
Yeah, I mean, I already put it in writing, so I'm sure all my subscribers and writers that have it bookmarked and they can tell me I'm wrong. But I'm at 7-5. I think that's kind of where I've been, and a lot of the games you mentioned, that's kind of where I am. Like, yeah, I think they'll probably lose to Clemson and Louisville and split the Cincinnati West Virginia game, like things like that. But for the most part, I mean, again, we talk about that, like the line of being good and bad. You just got to beat the Boston Colleges and the Syracuses and the Virginias. And if you do that and maybe pick off one and don't lose any stupid games, that's how you get to 7-5 in college football.
Yeah, agree. And I just feel like there's, at least with the preview last year and looking at Pitt, I was a lot less confident they were going to figure it out versus this year because we knew what Phil Dracovic was. We thought we knew. We were like, can he be the 2020 version? And I remember us sitting here, we were like, we're not, like, none of us were sold. I wasn't sold. Joey wasn't sold. You certainly weren't sold. Like, we were like, yeah, maybe, but probably not. So, like, what does it look like if he's not that version? I think we saw that it bottomed out. I think there's you mentioned it earlier, I thought was the perfect way to put it, nowhere to go but up. And with this schedule and the way I think the offense is going to improve, and I think Pitt has enough defensively where it's not going to be like the greatest Pittsburgh defense that we've seen under Narduzzi for sure, just because they don't have the horses, I don't think, at corner. Maybe a couple guys emerge at corner, but at least on paper, this doesn't look like the best Pat Narduzzi defense we've ever seen, but I don't think it needs to be if the offense takes the steps of improvement that I think they can take, plus the schedule, I think sets up pretty well. I think 7-5. I'm going to go with 7-5 too. I think that feels about right. Better than that, I think, would be an outstanding year. It would mean a lot of stuff went right.
Yeah.
Less than a bowl game, I think, just given this schedule, would be shocking. No, it would be a little bit surprising though. I think just given what Pitt returns on offense and just how this schedule plays out, that would be a little bit surprising if they missed a bowl game. But to your point, the line between being good and being bad is pretty thin. So bad quarterback play, a couple injuries, you never know. Jim, appreciate it, man. I want to give you a chance, as always, to plug where you're at, plug all your stuff, all your subscriptions, everything you got going on.
Yeah, you can always check us out on pantherlayer.com, panther-layer.com, pittsburgh.rivals.com, and you can follow me on Twitter at Jim Hammett. That's Hammett with 2 M's and 2 T's. I guess it's right there on the screen too.
Yeah, right on the screen. If you're listening on audio, you know where to find him. If you're listening on audio, you've probably been with us a while. Jim's fantastic, does great work over there. So go check out all of his Pittsburgh content. We'll be back soon with more ACC football previews. Follow us on Twitter at BC Podcast ACC. Hit us up on YouTube, youtube.com/@the-ACC Football Podcast. Shout out to our sponsors, Home Field and Section 103 for support. We'll be back soon with more ACC previews. Until then, go ACC.